Emily Carter had built an empire from the top floor of a glass tower. And she had done it without asking anyone for a single favor. At 29, she was the youngest CEO in Carter Holdings' 100-year history. The kind of woman whose name appeared in financial journals before her morning coffee finished brewing. The kind of woman other executives studied, the way generals study maps before battle. She wore power like a second skin. She signed contracts that moved markets. She looked across boardroom tables at men twice her age and did not blink first. And then, on a Tuesday in November 2 years ago, a black sedan ran a red light at 60 miles an hour and took all of it away from her in 4 seconds flat. She survived. That was what everyone kept reminding her, as though survival were the same thing as living. She survived, and now she sat in a wheelchair, and now, her hands, the same hands that once orchestrated mergers worth hundreds of millions of dollars, spent their mornings in physical therapy, learning how to grip things properly again. She survived, and now her own father looked at her across the dinner table with something that was almost pity, and almost guilt, and almost love, but was ultimately none of those things. He looked at her the way a man looks at an asset that has lost its value, and her mother smiled that careful, practiced smile, and passed the breadbasket, and said nothing that mattered. And said it beautifully. The anniversary dinner was her mother's idea. Margaret Carter believed deeply in the healing power of formal settings, white tablecloths, imported wine, the right guest list. If something was broken, you threw a dinner party at it. The family estate in Greenwich was already lit from the inside, warm and golden through its tall windows. By the time the caterers arrived Thursday morning, Emily watched them from her study on the second floor, her laptop open, her eyes somewhere else entirely. She knew what this dinner was really for. She had known for 3 weeks, ever since she overheard her father on the phone, his voice low and satisfied in a way it never was when he spoke to her. A merger, a partnership. Victor Lang. Victor Lang was 44 years old and had made his money the way most men of his type made money, by understanding that other people's desperation was an opportunity. He ran Lang Capital out of a midtown Manhattan office with views of Central Park, and he collected distressed assets the way some men collect art. He was charming in the way that very dangerous things are sometimes beautiful. Emily had met him twice at industry events and had catalogued him immediately. The practiced laugh, the eyes that were always calculating even when the mouth was smiling, the way he looked at her wheelchair with precisely the right amount of studied indifference, as though he had rehearsed that expression in a mirror. She did not trust him. She did not like him. And apparently, her father had promised him her hand, along with a controlling stake in the company's real estate division. Her cousin Lucas had delivered the news, with the kind of sympathy that was really just theater. He sat across from her in the study, his hands folded, his expression appropriately grave, and explained that the deal had already been structured, that Victor was expecting a public announcement at Thursday's dinner, that it would be better for everyone, really, if Emily simply understood the situation. Lucas was 32 and had been angling for her position since the day she took it. He smiled with his mouth and watched with his eyes and waited. He was very good at waiting. You need someone in your corner, Emily. Her mother had said that same evening, appearing in the doorway of the study after Lucas had gone. Margaret was elegant in the way of women who have spent decades curating themselves. She wore her disappointment like jewelry, someone who can help carry things. You can't go on like this. Emily looked at her and thought about 100 different responses and chose none of them. She turned her chair toward the window. I don't need carrying, she said, quietly. And her mother said, almost gently, you need a man to stand behind you. And Emily did not answer, because there was nothing left to say that would not end badly for both of them. She did not sleep that night. She lay in the dark and thought about the company her grandfather had started with $40,000 and a handshake, and what it meant that it had come to this, that her value to her own family was now measured in what she could be traded for. She thought about the accident. She thought about the 4 seconds. And somewhere around 3 in the morning, she began to think about what she was willing to do. The rain started Thursday afternoon, 2 hours before the dinner. coming down in sheets against the windows of the city. Emily had a driver, a quiet man named Thomas, who had worked for the family for 11 years. But Thomas had a family emergency that afternoon, and the replacement service sent a car with a broken heater and a navigation system that routed her directly into a sinkhole repair on Fifth Avenue. She sat in backed-up traffic for 40 minutes, watching the rain streak down the glass, and then the car made a sound no car should make and rolled to a stop in front of a Korean grocery on the corner of East 42nd. Ryan Mitchell noticed the hazard lights first. He was loading his equipment into the back of his van, a white Chevy with the logo of his one-man HVAC operation peeling off the driver's side door, when he saw the stranded car and the driver standing in the rain, looking helpless at the engine. He pulled his daughter Ava tighter under the overhang of the grocery store awning, told her to stay put, and walked over without being asked. Ava was 7 years old and had her father's dark eyes and her late mother's stubborn chin and absolutely no concept of the word strangers. She watched her father talk to the driver and then watched the back window of the car, and when the window came down 2 inches and a woman's face appeared beautiful and controlled and very, very tired, Ava waved. Emily did not mean to wave back. She did it anyway. Ryan assessed the situation in about 90 seconds. Cracked serpentine belt. Probably been going for a while. Nothing catastrophic, but nothing he could fix on a street corner in a thunderstorm. He came around to the passenger window and knocked, and Emily lowered it the rest of the way, and they looked at each other in the rain. He was tall, with hands that looked like they had done real work for a long time, and he was wearing a jacket with a hole in the left elbow, and he did not look at her wheelchair, which was folded in the trunk, with any particular expression at all. He looked at her face. He spoke to her face. "Belt's gone," he said. "Not going anywhere in this tonight. You want me to call you a ride?" She told him she needed to be somewhere in 40 minutes. He thought about it for a second. He looked back at Ava under the awning, who was making faces at the rain. "We can drop you," he said. "We're heading uptown anyway." Emily looked at him for a long moment. She had a very accurate instinct for people. It was, arguably, her best professional skill, and what she read in Ryan Mitchell was something she had not encountered in a long time. He was not performing anything. He was not managing her. He was just a man in the rain offering a ride. She said yes. In the van, with the heat cranked and the windshield wipers going, and Ava installed in the back seat with a juice box and a running commentary on every vehicle they passed, Emily felt something loosen in her chest that had been tight for 2 years. Ava leaned forward between the seats at one point and studied Emily with the total lack of self-consciousness that belongs exclusively to young children. "You look sad," Ava said. "Like, not crying sad, just tired sad," Ryan said. "Ava," in the tone fathers use when they mean stop, but also can't quite bring themselves to mean it. Emily looked at the little girl and felt something move behind her eyes. "I am a little tired," she said honestly. Ava nodded, very serious. "My dad says tired people need hot chocolate and a good night." She considered this. "You should come have hot chocolate with us," Ryan said Ava again, and this time he was also almost smiling. He pulled up in front of the estate at 6:52, right on time. The lights of the house blazed through the rain. Through the wrought iron gate, Emily could already see the valets, the lined-up cars, the small crowd of people moving inside the tall windows. She did not move to get out immediately. Ryan did not rush her. He sat with his hands on the wheel and looked straight ahead, and she appreciated that more than she could have articulated in that moment. "Thank you," she said. He nodded. She reached into her bag and held out $300, the standard tip for a ride in her world, and he looked at it for a second and shook his head. "Just a lift," he said. She stared at him. Nobody in her world turned down $300. Nobody in her world did anything for just. She tucked the money away. She gave him her card. She was not entirely sure why. She told herself it was professional reflex. She got out into the rain with Thomas's help. The estate's security team had appeared by then, and she went inside. And she sat through 3 hours of the worst dinner of her life. And when Victor Lang reached across the table and put his hand over hers with the confidence of a man who believed the arrangement was already made, She thought about a white who said she looked tired, sad, and she made a decision. She called Ryan the next morning. She did not apologize for the hour. She laid it out plainly, the way she laid out any business problem, because if she framed it as anything else, she knew she would lose her nerve. She needed someone to attend a family event as her partner. She would pay him fairly. She would keep things entirely professional. It would last one evening. Ryan listened without interrupting, which was already more than most people managed. Then he said, "No." She asked why. He said, "I have a kid. I'm not dragging her into whatever's happening in your family." She said Ava would not need to be involved. He said that wasn't the point. She said she understood. She thanked him and hung up. He called back 40 minutes later. He did not explain at first what had changed his mind. He just said he would do it. And he had conditions. He wanted to know exactly what she was dealing with. He wasn't walking into something blind, and under no circumstances was Ava to hear anything that was going to confuse her about what was real and what wasn't. Emily agreed to all of it. She told him everything. She told him about Victor and the deal, and Lucas and her mother's careful face, and the way her father looked at her now. She had not told anyone all of it before. She got through most of it in her professional voice, and then her voice changed toward the end, just slightly, the way a surface changes just before it cracks. Ryan said nothing for a moment. Then, "Okay, I'll be there." What she did not tell him, what she did not know how to tell him, was that the investigation she had quietly commissioned 2 months ago had come back with something she could not stop looking at: the mechanic's report on her car, the brake line, the precise, clean nature of the cut. She had told herself it was an anomaly. She had told herself the report was inconclusive. She had told herself a lot of things in the dark at 3 in the morning, and none of them had made her feel better. And now she was fairly sure she knew why. The dinner party at the Carter estate the following Saturday was not informal by any standard. Margaret Carter had requested a dress code and gotten one. The foyer gleamed. The flowers were fresh. 62 people moved through the downstairs rooms with drinks and careful smiles, and there was a string quartet in the east parlor, because Margaret believed music civilized an evening. Victor Lang arrived at 7:15 in a car that cost more than most people's houses, and worked the room with a fluency that Emily found deeply exhausting to watch. Lucas stood near the bar and laughed too loudly and watched the door. Emily came in at 7:40, which was later than her mother had asked, and exactly when she intended. She came in through the side entrance, which was accessible, and Ryan Mitchell came in beside her. He wore a dark navy suit that fit him well. She had sent a tailor to him the day before, over his objections, and he carried himself the way men carry themselves when they are not particularly concerned with impressing anyone. His hands were clean and his shoes were shined, and he held the door, and he did not make a production of anything. Ava was with her sitter at home, having exacted a promise from her father that he would bring her a good story. The room did not go quiet all at once. It went quiet in waves. First, the people nearest the entrance, then spreading outward, rippling through the space, until the string quartet was the only sound left, and even they trailed off a few bars later when the second violinist looked up and understood what everyone was looking at. Margaret Carter stood very still near the fireplace. Gerald Carter, 60 years old, silver-haired, a man who had survived 4 recessions and 2 industry collapses and had emerged from each of them, looking more certain of himself, put his glass down. Victor Lang turned from the conversation he was having and took in Ryan Mitchell with a single slow look. He smiled the smile he used when he thought he had the advantage. "Emily," he said, walking toward her. His hand already extended for her arm as though they were already what her father wanted them to be. He glanced at Ryan. "And this must be Ryan Mitchell," Ryan said, and shook Victor's hand with the brief, complete confidence of a man who is not performing anything. Victor's smile thinned. He looked at the suit. He looked at the hands. He had the particular radar of men who sort other men by category. And Ryan did not fit the categories he used. "A friend of Emily's?" Victor said. The word friend was doing a great deal of work. Emily felt Ryan's hand find hers, not grabbing. Just there, certain, and warm. She did not look at her mother. She did not look at her father. She looked at Victor Lang. "Ryan is my partner," she said. The word landed like a stone into still water. Victor laughed, a short sound, and turned to Gerald. "Gerald, he fixes air conditioning," Lucas said from across the room, his voice carrying with the precision of someone who had practiced it. "He runs a one-man repair shop." "That's what this is." A few people laughed. Most people did not, because most people could read a room, and the room had gone very strange. Victor shook his head with an expression of patient amusement. "Emily, come on. The man is a technician. This is. At least he doesn't trade women for contracts," Emily said. Her voice was even. The room went completely still. Gerald Carter's face did something complicated. Victor's smile went rigid. Emily looked at her father, and then at her mother, and then she looked at Ryan, who was watching her with an expression that was not pity, and was not awe, and was not calculation. It was just attention, real attention. She squared her shoulders. "He's my man," she said. The words were quiet and absolute, and they landed in that room like something that could not be taken back, and she did not want them taken back. In the days that followed, Lucas moved quickly. He was efficient in the way that smaller ambitions are always efficient, uncomplicated by conscience, undistracted by anything except the goal. His investigator produced a file on Ryan Mitchell within 72 hours. The debt, from his wife Claire's illness 3 years ago. The medical bills that had taken everything they had saved together, the lean years of building the HVAC business back up from nothing. It was the file of a man who had loved someone and lost them, and kept going anyway. But Lucas presented it to Gerald Carter as evidence of a man with motives. Gerald Carter was not a man given easily to doubt, but he was a man who had spent 30 years in business and knew that desperation and opportunity were first cousins. Margaret went to see Ryan on a Tuesday. She arrived at his shop, a rented bay in a commercial strip in Queens, in a car that probably cost more than the entire building. She was polite and direct, and she laid a check on his workbench, without drama. It was for $250,000. She looked him in the eye and told him that she appreciated his kindness to her daughter, but that this situation was not what it appeared, and that the most generous thing he could do for Emily was to step away cleanly. Ryan looked at the check for a long moment. He thought about the medical bills. He thought about Ava's school. He thought about the way Emily had said, "I am a little tired," to a 7-year-old in a van. In the rain, like that was the first honest thing she'd been allowed to say in months. He picked up the check and held it out. "Keep it," he said. Margaret looked at him with an expression that was not quite what she had prepared. She took the check back. She left without another word. Ava did not fully understand what was happening, but she understood that some kids at school had said something mean about her dad, and she came home on a Wednesday with a drawing she had made at lunch, a picture of herself and her father and Emily, at a table with very large cups of hot chocolate, and she put it on the refrigerator with a butterfly magnet, and said nothing about it. Ryan saw it that evening and stood in front of it for a long time. When Emily came over that Sunday, she had started coming over on Sundays, ostensibly to discuss strategy, actually because the apartment smelled like coffee, and Ava's drawings were everywhere, and nobody there was managing her. Ava showed her the picture with great seriousness. Emily looked at it. She reached out and touched the edge of it very gently and said nothing. Ryan handed her a cup of coffee and did not make it into a moment, which made it into a moment. 3 days after the dinner, Emily sat alone in her study and opened a folder she had not touched in 6 weeks. It was thin, 2 reports, a photograph, a transcribed phone call, but every page in it had cost her something, some expenditure of hope or nerve, and she had put it away because looking at it made her feel the specific exhaustion of a person trying to solve a problem they are not supposed to know exists. The photograph was from the accident scene. She had gotten it through a source she trusted absolutely and was not going to name to anyone. It showed her car, or what remained of it, caught in the sweep of an emergency vehicle's lights. It showed. At the edge of the frame, slightly blurred by distance and angle, a figure in the embankment. She had looked at that photograph many times. She had not yet allowed herself to know what she knew. She had been trying to find the edges of what had happened to her car for 2 years. She had tried twice through official channels and gotten nowhere, and the unofficial investigator she'd hired had given her the brake line report and then gone quiet in the way people go quiet when they have been told to. The piece she did not have was a witness. She did not have anyone who had been there that night who was willing to talk. She did not know, had not known, until Ryan mentioned it almost accidentally one evening, recounting a story about a volunteer call he'd been on years before, that he had been part of the emergency response that night. Not a firefighter, not officially, but a volunteer with the local department who had been driving past when the accident happened and had stopped, and had helped pull the driver of the sedan out of the wreck, and had then stayed long enough to see, at the edge of the lights, a man he had not thought about again until he was sitting in the Carter family's foyer and saw that same man standing near the bar. Lucas. Standing at the edge of the accident scene 2 years ago, in the dark, watching. Emily sat very still when Ryan told her this. She had the particular stillness of a person putting together something they had already halfway known. The brake line report, Lucas's anxiety every time she brought up the accident, the way he had been so careful, so thorough, so patient in his campaign to position himself as the family's answer to Emily's diminished capacity. She thought about the 4 seconds. She thought about what it meant that she had not died. She thought about what it would have meant if she had. She pulled out her laptop and accessed the company's server. Her company, she reminded herself. Hers, and began to dig in a direction she had never gone before. Because she had not known where to dig, what she found took 3 days and made her hands shake. Lucas had been moving money for 14 months. Small amounts at first, then larger, routed through a subsidiary they had restructured after the accident restructured. She now understood, to create a channel that did not obviously trace back, he had taken $11 million. He had covered it in 4 different layers of transactions, and he had done it carefully, but he had not accounted for Emily Carter personally going through the books at 2 in the morning with the particular focus of a woman who has nothing left to lose and everything to prove. She found every layer. She printed every document. She sat back in her chair in the quiet of her apartment and thought about a man who had watched her nearly die and had gone home and kept stealing from her. Lucas had been watching her too, in his way. He knew she was getting close to something. He moved first. The story broke on a Monday morning. A leak to 2 different financial news outlets, timed for maximum damage. Single dad targets, disabled heiress. The photos they ran were taken without consent. Ryan outside his shop. Ryan picking up Ava from school, and the framing was specific and devastating, built on just enough truth to be poisonous. A source close to the Carter family confirmed that Emily's companion had a significant financial history, and that the relationship had raised serious concerns among family members. By 9 in the morning, Ryan's phone had received 47 calls. By 10, a police detective had arrived at his shop with questions about an alleged harassment complaint filed by Carter Holdings, and by 11, in front of Ava and 2 of Ava's classmates who had come over to play, Ryan Mitchell was taken in for questioning. Ava did not cry right away. She stood in the doorway and watched her father put on his jacket, and watched him look back at her and say, quietly but clearly, "I'll be home tonight. I promise." He kept his eyes on her until he was out of her sight. Then she went inside and sat on the kitchen floor next to the refrigerator and looked at her drawing with the butterfly magnet. And then she cried. Emily heard about it at noon. She was in a meeting with Carter Holdings' general counsel when her assistant came in with a note, and she read the note, and then she said to the assembled lawyers, "Everyone out," in a voice that left no room for interpretation. The room emptied. She sat alone at the head of the conference table and thought about Ava on the kitchen floor, and about Ryan saying "I promise," and about her father, who had called her an hour earlier to say carefully, with the measured precision of a man delivering an ultimatum, that the situation with the technician had become untenable, and that for the good of the company and the family, she needed to make a public statement. She thought about what she was made of. She had been asking herself that question for 2 years, in the dark, at 3 in the morning, and she had not always liked the answer. She thought about it now, and she found something that had not been there before, or maybe had always been there, and simply needed the right kind of pressure to become visible. She thought about Ryan in his van in the rain, saying just a lift. She thought about him looking at her face. She opened her laptop, and she called her assistant back, and she said, "Get me everything we have on Lucas from the last 18 months, and schedule an emergency shareholder meeting for Thursday." They tried to talk her out of it. The lawyers said Thursday was too fast. Her father called twice. Margaret sent a text that was very long and said nothing. Victor Lang had his own counsel reach out with a message that was technically a warning and actually a threat. Emily forwarded everything to her legal team and answered none of it personally. She spent Wednesday night in her study with 3 lawyers and an outside forensic accountant and the full body of evidence she had compiled, and by 4 in the morning they had a presentation that was airtight and a strategy that was clean. And Emily Carter had not slept. And she did not care. Ryan was released Wednesday afternoon. The complaint against him collapsed by a legal team Emily had retained before he even knew she had moved on his behalf. He came straight from the station to her apartment, still in the clothes he'd been taken in. She opened the door. They stood in the doorway for a moment. "You didn't have to do that," he said. She said, "Yes, I did." He looked at her for a long time. She had the quality, when she chose to use it, of making people feel that she was seeing them entirely. She was using it now. "Ava's okay," he said finally. "She wants to know if you're coming Sunday." Emily's jaw moved. "I'll be there," she said. The shareholder meeting was at 9 in the morning on Thursday, in the Carter Holdings main boardroom on the 38th floor, and by 8:45, every seat was full, and 3 overflow rooms were patched in by video. Gerald Carter arrived at 8:55 and sat at the head of the table and did not look at his daughter, who was already in the room, positioned to his left, with her legal team around her and a projector loaded behind her and an expression that had been described, over the course of her career, by a variety of people as formidable. Lucas came in at 8:59 looking composed. He saw Emily's face, and the composure flickered, just once, for just a moment. She did not allow preamble. She stood, or rather, she positioned her chair at the front, and she faced the room, and she spoke, and she had the quality, when she wanted it, of making every person in the room feel that she was speaking only to them. She began with the break line. She showed them the report. She showed them the witness statement Ryan Mitchell had provided, sworn, notarized, specific, placing Lucas Carter at the scene of the accident on the night 2 years ago in November. She showed them the financial records. She showed them the $11 million. She showed them every layer of the routing, every transaction, every cover. She was precise, and she was thorough, and she was unhurried, and the room did not make a sound. 2 years ago, she said, someone made a decision about my life. They decided I was worth more as a liability than as a leader. They were wrong about that. She looked at Lucas, who had gone very still, and every person in this room who looked at me in this wheelchair and wondered if I still had what it takes. I want you to understand something. The only person in 2 years who never once looked at me like I was diminished. She paused, and the room held its breath as someone none of you would have chosen to let in the door. The security team entered at the back of the room. Lucas stood. He looked at his cousin with an expression that had moved through composure and anger and arrived somewhere that was almost disbelief. "Emily," he started. She turned away. She did not need his words. Gerald Carter did not speak during the meeting. He sat at the head of the table and watched his nephew led out of the room, and he was very quiet, in the way of men who have understood, too late, that they have been solving the wrong problem for a long time. Victor Lang's firm withdrew from the Carter Holdings deal by end of business Thursday. The partnership was not what had been represented. According to their statement, Emily accepted this with exactly the feeling she expected, which was nothing in particular. She had other partners, better ones, on better terms, and she had already been in conversations with 2 of them for 6 weeks. She had not been sitting still. She had never been sitting still. The civil case moved quickly, as these things go when the evidence is complete and the defendant's counsel is not actually interested in a trial. Lucas pleaded to the financial charges. The question of the accident, the criminal question, which was a different matter, took longer. And the answer, when it came, was the one Emily had known it would be, since she had sat in the dark at 2 in the morning and looked at the brake line report and let herself finally, fully, believe what she had always suspected. He had arranged it. He had arranged all of it. He had watched her car go off the road and driven away and gone home and waited to be the person her parents turned to. She did not speak publicly about how she felt. She gave one statement, brief and factual. And then she went home. Gerald Carter came to see her on a Sunday, 3 weeks after the shareholder meeting. He came alone, without Margaret, without counsel. He sat in her living room in the chair across from her, and he looked at his hands for a while, and Emily waited. Because she had learned, in the years of running his company and the years of being his daughter, that rushing Gerald Carter never produced anything worth having. "I thought I was protecting the company," he said finally. Emily looked at him. He looked up. "I told myself that I was protecting what your grandfather built." He stopped. Started again. "I was afraid of what you'd become. After." He meant after the accident. He meant the wheelchair. He meant the thing he could not quite say, which was that he had looked at his daughter and seen someone diminished and had not looked hard enough to see that he was wrong. "I know," Emily said. It was not absolution. It was not quite forgiveness. It was something smaller and more honest, which was that she understood how it had happened, and understanding was the beginning of something, even if she did not yet know what. He nodded. He put his hands on his knees. He said, "You're better than I gave you credit for." She said, "I know that too." He laughed, a short, surprised sound that she had not heard from him in 2 years, maybe longer. She did not quite laugh, but something in her face moved. The fund was Emily's idea, and she moved on it the way she moved on everything she believed in quickly, without asking permission. She sold 10% of her stake in Carter Holdings at a premium, and used the proceeds to establish the Carter Access Foundation, which would provide employment support, adaptive equipment grants, and legal advocacy for people with disabilities in the workforce. She announced it on a Thursday morning, in a press release that also, in its final paragraph, announced the appointment of a new independent board member and a revised governance structure that gave the CEO Emily veto power over all strategic partnerships going forward. The financial press called it a power consolidation. She called it good governance, Ryan said, when she told him about the foundation. "You didn't have to name it Carter." She said, "Yes, I did. I'm not done with that name yet." He looked at her with that expression he had, the one that was just attention, complete and quiet, and nodded slowly. "Fair enough," he said. Ava was in the kitchen behind them, making a catastrophic amount of noise with a box of cereal and a plastic bowl. And the morning light was coming through the window over the sink, and Emily Carter sat at Ryan Mitchell's kitchen table in Queens and drank her coffee and felt, for the first time in 2 years, like herself. He told her the rest of it on a Saturday in April, when they were alone, Ava at a friend's birthday party, and he had been carrying it long enough that the weight of it had become a kind of presence in the room whenever they were quiet together. He told her about the volunteer call, about driving past, about the car in the ditch and the smoke, about pulling the door open with another man who lived in the neighborhood and getting her out. He told her he had seen her face, and she had been unconscious, and he had stayed until the ambulance came, and then left, because he was nobody to be interviewed, and nothing in his experience suggested that the lives of people like Emily Carter and the lives of people like Ryan Mitchell were meant to intersect. He told her he had not known who she was. He had found out months later, by accident, when her face appeared on a news segment, and then she had been in a broken-down car in the rain, and Ava had waved at her and he had tried. He said he had tried very hard to be sensible about it. Emily listened to all of it without moving. When he finished, the kitchen was quiet. She thought about being pulled from a car by a man who left before she could thank him, and she thought about the van in the rain, and she thought about the particular and improbable geometry of how people find each other. "You should have told me," she said. He said, "I know." She said, "I'm glad you didn't." He looked at her. She said, "I needed to know you first. Before I owed you something." He was quiet for a moment. "You don't owe me anything." She said, "I know that too." He took her hand. Not for an audience this time. Not to make a point to anyone. Just because they were at a kitchen table in Queens on a Saturday morning, and there was nothing else either of them needed to do except be there. She looked at their hands. She thought that she had spent a very long time being managed and arranged and planned around. And she thought that this plain, unperforming, unhurried thing was what she had been missing without knowing its name. The physical therapy had been ongoing since the accident, with varying degrees of commitment from Emily's side. There were weeks when she went every day, and weeks when she canceled everything, and sat in her study with the blinds down. Since January, she had been going every day. The therapist, a matter-of-fact woman named Dr. Patricia Webb, who did not traffic in false hope or unnecessary discouragement, had told her in February that there was meaningful progress in the nerve responses in her left leg, and that continued work was warranted, and that outcomes were genuinely uncertain, and that uncertain was not the same as impossible. Emily had put that in her calendar as a recurring note that read, "Uncertain is not impossible." She looked at it every morning. On a Wednesday in June, in the therapy gym on the 4th floor of the rehabilitation center, Emily Carter stood. It took 2 therapists and a set of parallel bars and every molecule of concentration she possessed, and she stood for 11 seconds before her legs gave out, and the therapist caught her, and she was back in the chair, and she was breathing very hard. And Dr. Webb was writing something in her chart with the expression of a woman who has seen remarkable things and tries not to make too much of them in the moment. And Emily said nothing for about 30 seconds. She looked at the parallel bars. She looked at her hands on the rails. She thought about the 4 seconds of a November night and what they had taken. And she thought about the 11 seconds she had just spent, standing in a room under fluorescent lights, and she understood that these were not equivalent, that 11 seconds of standing was not 4 seconds of impact run backward, but that they were both real, both hers, both part of the same continuous life. She was still here. She was still making decisions. She was not waiting for permission. Then she said, "Same time Thursday." Dr. Webb said yes. Ryan was in the waiting room when she came out. She had not told him she was doing this today, had not told him she was doing anything in particular, only that she had therapy at 2. He stood up when he saw her. He could read her face by now the way people read the faces of those they have watched through important things. He said nothing. She said nothing. She reached out, and he took her hand, and they went down in the elevator together. And in the elevator she leaned her head against his shoulder very briefly, and he put his arm around her, and neither of them said anything about it. Ava was in the back seat of the van, home from school, with a drawing she had made in art class that she wanted to show Emily. It was a house, large and somewhat architectural for 7 years old, with a garden and a car in the drive, and 3 figures in the front yard that Ava had labeled, in careful block letters, DAD, Ava, and EM. Emily held the drawing on her lap. She looked at it for a long time. Ava leaned over the seat. "I left room for a dog," Ava said helpfully, pointing to a blank space near the garden. "In case we get one." Ryan, in the driver's seat, did not say anything. Emily looked at the blank space where the dog might go. She thought it was the most hopeful thing she had seen in years. "What kind of dog?" she said. Ava had clearly already thought about this extensively. In the weeks that followed, Emily Carter appeared on the cover of a business magazine with the headline, "Back in Control." She had not asked for the word back. She had not asked for the framing, but she had thought about it, sitting with the advance copy of the magazine in her apartment. And she had decided not to correct it, not because it was right, exactly, but because the story of getting control back was the story people knew how to read, and there was a better story, a harder and quieter story about what it means to be seen clearly by someone who has no reason to manage you and every reason to walk away. And who stays anyway. That story was hers. She did not need it on a cover. The evening she spent at Ryan's apartment the following Sunday was ordinary in every way that mattered. Ava made an elaborate production of teaching Emily, a card game she had invented that had 17 rules and no discernible winning condition, and Ryan cooked something simple that was better than it had any right to be, and they ate at the small table in the kitchen with the radio on low. After Ava was in bed, Emily and Ryan sat on the couch with their coffee going cold, and the apartment was quiet, the way apartments are quiet when a child has finally stopped moving. Outside, the city was its usual self-constant and indifferent, and in some way reassuring for it. Emily said, eventually, "She called me Mom today." Ryan looked at her. His expression was very careful. "In the card game," Emily said, "she introduced me to her stuffed rabbit as my mom, Emily." And then she corrected herself and said, "Emily," and kept going like nothing happened. She paused, like it was a slip and not a thing. Ryan did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Was it?" Emily thought about the drawing on the refrigerator with the butterfly magnet. She thought about the blank space where the dog might go. She thought about 11 seconds on parallel bars, and what it meant to stand up in a room where someone was waiting in the hall. "No," she said quietly. "I don't think it was." He put his arm around her. Outside, the city went on. The light in the kitchen was warm and ordinary and completely sufficient, and Emily Carter sat in it and thought about the specific shape of the life that was assembling itself around her, not the life that had been arranged for her, not the life that had been interrupted, but the life she was building now, in the spaces between the things that had tried to diminish her, built from the plain and durable materials of honesty and stubbornness, and the particular grace of people who choose you without agenda. She thought about uncertain is not impossible. She thought it was the truest thing she knew. She was not done. She had never been done. She was just beginning, and she was beginning in exactly the right place, with exactly the right person beside her, not because he was strong enough to carry her, but because he had never once believed she needed carrying. And that, in the end, was the whole of it. That was everything. There is a version of this story in which Emily Carter is defined by her accident, in which the wheelchair is the first and last thing, the frame through which everything else must be understood. Her family told that version. Victor Lang assumed it. The news outlets that ran Ryan's photograph under a misleading headline told it. It is the version that people reach for because it is simple and it has a clear logic. A woman is diminished, and the people around her manage their relationship with that diminishment in whatever way suits their interests. It is a story about limitation, but there is another version, and it is the true one. In this version, Emily Carter is a woman who ran a 100-year-old company at 29, who survived something unsurvivable, who spent 2 years being told in the language of careful concern and strategic patience that her value had depreciated, who began, quietly and without announcement, to prove otherwise, who found, in the least expected of places, the one person who was not invested in her depreciation, who stood up, not all at once, not without effort, not cleanly, and went forward. In this version, the wheelchair is not the story. It is just a fact. The way all the facts of a life are facts. Present, real, and insufficient on their own to tell you anything that matters. On a Sunday in September, Emily arrived at Ryan's apartment with a bag of groceries and a folder under her arm and was met at the door by Ava, who had clearly been waiting, positioned for maximum dramatic impact on the top step. "We're getting a dog," Ava announced. Emily looked at Ryan, who was in the kitchen doorway looking the way he looked when Ava had gotten there before him on something. "We're talking about getting a dog," he said. Emily handed him the groceries. She looked at Ava. She thought about the blank space in the drawing, the careful margin left for possibility. She thought about what it meant to leave room. "What kind?" she said, for the second time, and this time, she meant it as a yes. Later, sitting at the table with the groceries put away, and Ava doing homework with the focused intensity of someone who has recently discovered that math can be argued with, and Ryan across from Emily, going through the paperwork for the new company he was registering, Mitchell Climate Solutions. A name Ava had insisted on, because it sounded, she said, like something important. Emily opened the folder she had brought and slid a single sheet across the table. It was the first page of the Carter Access Foundation's 6-month report. The numbers were better than projected. The employment placement rate was 63%, which was higher than any comparable program she could find. She watched Ryan read it. He read slowly, which she had learned meant he was reading carefully and not that he was uncertain. He turned the page. He read the second page. He put it down and looked at her. He said, 63%. She said, "In 6 months." He looked at the paper again. He shook his head once, slowly, and she could see that he was trying to decide whether to say something that would sound like too much. She decided to spare him. "I know," she said simply. And she did. She knew what the number meant, and what it had taken, and what it would require to do better. And she was already planning how. She was always already planning how. That had not changed. That would not change. It was, she had come to understand, the most useful thing about her, not the name, not the money, not even the particular quality of mind that could work through a forensic accounting puzzle at 2 in the morning. It was this. She did not stop. She had been tested on this point comprehensively, and the answer had come back consistent. Emily Carter did not stop. And now, for the first time, she did not have to.